The sun had just slipped below the horizon, painting the suburban streets in a soft golden glow, the kind of light that usually brings a sense of quiet, of day's end settling gently over the neighborhood. But inside Avery Hayes's home, that peace didn't reach. The air was heavy, charged with something unspoken and sharp. Avery stood frozen in the doorway, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. Their heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper, a quiet, seething anger, the kind that builds over years of restraint, of watching boundaries crossed again and again. Brittany Adams had always been a presence in the neighborhood, loud, self-appointed, always ready to correct someone's trash placement or scold a child for laughing too loudly. From the moment Avery moved in, Brittany had made it clear. She ran things here. But today was different. Today, she had gone too far. There, in the middle of the living room, stood Brittany, her hands wrapped tightly around the leg of Avery's 2-year-old daughter. The child was sobbing, her small body trembling, arms flailing helplessly as Brittany held on with a grip that looked more like punishment than correction. The sound of the baby's cries filled the room, each one striking Avery like a physical blow. "Let go of her." Avery's voice was calm. Too calm, maybe, but it wasn't empty. It was deliberate. Years as a judge had taught them that emotion, when left unchecked, could unravel everything. In court, a single outburst could derail a trial, destroy a case. But this wasn't a courtroom. This was their child, their blood. And yet, even now, Avery reached for that old composure, not because they didn't feel the fire inside, but because they knew control was power. Brittany didn't flinch. Her face twisted with anger, eyes wide with the kind of entitlement that comes from never being challenged. "She's nothing but a nuisance, Avery," she snapped. "Disturbing the peace. You need to control your child." Disturbing the peace. The words barely made sense. The only disturbance in the room was the sound of a terrified toddler, wailing because a grown woman had grabbed her like she had the right. Avery's mind reeled. This wasn't about noise. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. About someone who thought they could walk into another person's home and impose their will without consequence. Avery stepped forward, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of holding back. They'd stood in far more dangerous rooms, faced down criminals and liars and people who played with lives like games. But this was different. This wasn't about justice in the abstract. This was about a mother's instinct, raw and unfiltered. Someone had crossed a line, and Avery wasn't going to pretend it didn't matter. It wasn't just about the baby. It was about respect, about the quiet, steady erosion of dignity that happens when no one ever says enough. Brittany had taken it upon herself to police, to punish, to dominate. And Avery, who had once worn a robe and carried a gavel, who had spent a career upholding order, knew this wasn't order. This was cruelty disguised as authority. They took a slow breath, grounding themselves. "Let go of her, Brittany," they said again, voice low but firm, stepping closer. Every muscle in their body wanted to act, to pull the child free by force if needed. But they waited. Not out of hesitation, out of strategy. They weren't just a parent in this moment. They were someone who understood the weight of a single action, the ripple of a decision. Brittany looked down at them, her grip tightening. "What's your problem, Avery? You think you can intimidate me with that calm act?" She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "You may have been a judge, but I don't care about that. You're nothing here." The words stung. Not because they were true, but because they touched something real. Avery had been a judge. They had presided over trials, delivered verdicts that changed lives. But they'd left that world behind, worn down by the weight of decisions that never quite brought peace. For a moment, the old fire flickered, the voice that commanded silence with a glance, that made attorneys stammer and defendants shrink. But Avery didn't let it take over. That life wasn't theirs anymore. This moment wasn't about authority. It was about love. About the kind of protection that doesn't need a title. Without another word, Avery moved swift, precise. They reached for Brittany's wrist, not with wild force, but with the controlled certainty of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Brittany tried to pull away, but it was too late. The grip on the child's leg loosened. Just enough. And in that split second, something shifted. Avery's calm didn't break. It deepened. It became something quieter, more dangerous. Not rage, but resolve. A silent promise that this wouldn't be forgotten, that no one gets to do this and walk away unchallenged. Let go of her now. The words were quiet, but they carried everything. Years of courtroom discipline, the weight of a life spent balancing justice and mercy, and now, the fierce, unshakable love of a parent. Brittany faltered. Just for a second. But that was all Avery needed. In that same instant, a memory flashed. Avery standing in a courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. The hum of whispers, the rustle of papers, the defendant standing pale and nervous before them. Avery, seated high, gavel in hand, delivering a verdict with the calm of someone who knew the law was their domain. Back then, they were justice personified. Cold, impartial, unyielding. And yet, even in those moments of power, there was a hollowness. A quiet voice inside asking, asterisk, did this bring peace? Or just consequence? Asterisk. Now, back in the present, holding their sobbing daughter close, Avery understood the difference. That courtroom was gone. The gavel was gone. But the strength, the deep, unwavering sense of right and wrong, hadn't left. It had simply changed shape. It wasn't about rulings anymore. It was about protection. About making sure the world didn't swallow the people you love. Brittany stood a few feet away now, hands on her hips, face flushed with anger. You've been walking around like you own this place, she sneered. But the truth is, I do. I've been here longer. I know how things run. Avery said nothing. They just held their child tighter, feeling the small body slowly begin to relax against them. Brittany stepped forward, invading their space, voice rising. You think because you were a judge you can tell me what to do? You're not a judge anymore. You're just another parent. And then it happened. Brittany reached out and flicked the baby's leg. Hard. The cry that followed tore through the room. Through Avery's chest. Through every last thread of restraint. That was it. The calm broke. Not into chaos, but into action. The courtroom may have been behind them, but the instinct, the deep, trained sense of when a line has been crossed, was still alive. And, this time, it wasn't about delivering justice from a bench. It was about defending it with their hands, their voice, their presence. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about making sure no one ever forgot who they were dealing with. Avery's stance shifted, subtle but firm, like the quiet before a storm. Their voice cut through the heavy air, low, steady, deliberate. Don't touch my child. It wasn't a plea. It was a boundary drawn in stone. But Brittany wasn't done. Not even close. She raised an eyebrow, arms folding across her chest with that same defiant posture she'd worn since the first day they'd met. What are you going to do, Avery? She said, voice laced with mockery. You can't intimidate me anymore. I know exactly who you are. You think your lawyer tricks still work on people like me? Not today. There was something almost theatrical about her arrogance, the way she stood there, convinced she had the upper hand. But Avery had seen this kind of defiance before, not just in neighbors but in courtrooms. People who believed rules were suggestions, who thought authority was something to be challenged, not respected. They'd faced them for years, defendants who smirked at the bench, witnesses who lied with confidence, individuals who believed they were above consequence. And yet, with Brittany, it felt different. This wasn't just about control over a neighborhood. It was personal. She wasn't just trying to win an argument. She was trying to make Avery feel small, powerless, like they didn't belong. But Avery wasn't powerless.
Not now.
Not here. They took a slow, steadying breath. The old Avery, the judge, might have responded with authority, with the weight of the law behind every word. They might have commanded silence, demanded compliance, made it clear who was in charge. But that version of them had stepped away for a reason. The person standing in this room now wasn't interested in ego battles or power plays. What they wanted was simpler.
Deeper.
They wanted their daughter safe. They wanted peace in their home. Avery's eyes locked onto Brittany's, unwavering. "You're in my way now, Brittany," they said, voice quiet but carrying the weight of finality. "And I don't care who you think you are. You're not going to get away with this." Brittany scoffed, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, I'm in your way? You're the one standing in the way of me and getting what I want. Avery, you act like your kid's special, like she gets special treatment. But I'm not going to sit by while you turn this neighborhood upside down." Avery felt the tension tighten in their jaw. The old fire, the one forged in courtrooms and fed by years of high-stakes decisions, flickered at the edges of their mind. They had once commanded silence with a glance, made people listen with nothing but presence. That power wasn't gone. It was still there, humming beneath the surface. But Avery knew better than to reach for it blindly. The law wasn't on their side here, not in this living room, not in this moment. This wasn't about legal rights or courtroom procedure. This was about principle, about drawing a line and standing behind it. They stood a little taller, one hand resting gently on their daughter's back, a quiet anchor in the storm. They didn't need to prove anything to Brittany. They didn't have to remind her of who they used to be. But in that moment, it didn't matter whether she knew their past or not. What mattered was that Avery wasn't backing down. Not this time. This confrontation had been building for weeks, maybe even months. Every judgmental comment, every sideways glance, every unsolicited advice about parenting or property lines had led to this. Brittany had always acted like she was in charge, like the neighborhood answered to her. But Avery had spent a lifetime dealing with difficult people, people who talked loud, who pushed boundaries, who thought they could wear others down. And they weren't about to let someone like Brittany walk all over them. Avery took a step forward, never breaking eye contact. "You don't get to control this neighborhood," they said, voice calm but unshakable. "And you sure as hell don't get to control me." Brittany sneered, her eyes narrowing with a mix of rage and disbelief. She had expected Avery to shrink, to apologize, to retreat. That's what people usually did when she turned up the pressure. But this quiet, unwavering strength wasn't what she'd anticipated. For the first time, there was a flicker in her expression, something uncertain, almost like doubt. "Oh, is that so?" Brittany shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think you've forgotten who's really in charge here." Her hands hovered near the baby again, and Avery's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed to act, to push her back, to remove her from the space, to make her understand she wasn't welcome. But Avery stayed still, controlled. Their voice, when it came, was like steel wrapped in silk, calm, precise, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I'm not asking Brittany," they said. "I'm telling you." For a moment, the room fell silent. The baby's cries had softened, then faded, as Avery gently rocked her, adjusting their hold, offering comfort with every small movement. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Brittany stood frozen, her anger still simmering, but something had shifted. The certainty in her posture wavered. She wasn't in control anymore. Not like she thought she was. She opened her mouth, ready to fire back another insult, another challenge. But Avery raised a hand, not harshly, but firmly, cutting her off. "I've been in situations far worse than this," Avery said, voice steady. "And I'm not backing down. You can either leave now, or I can call the authorities and have you removed from my property. The choice is yours." Brittany stared at them. For the first time, the mask cracked. Her defiance began to crumble under the weight of the moment. She looked at Avery, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who wasn't going to play her game. Someone who had the knowledge, the composure, and the resolve to protect what was theirs. And then, without a word, she turned. No final remark. No dramatic exit line. Just the sharp pivot of her heel and the heavy slam of the door behind her. Avery stood there, heart still pounding, arms wrapped tightly around their daughter. The adrenaline hadn't fully faded, but beneath it, a quiet relief began to spread, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. It wasn't over. They knew that. This wasn't the end of the tension, the sideways glances, the undercurrent of conflict in the neighborhood. But this was a victory. Small, maybe, but real. The first of many, they hoped. Holding their child close, Avery whispered, soft and low, "We're safe now, baby. We're safe." Later, they stood alone in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly in the background, the only sound in the quiet house. The air still felt charged, like smoke lingering after a fire. The baby, now calm, looked up at them with wide, trusting eyes, as if she could sense that something had changed, even if she couldn't understand it. Grounded, purposeful. When they opened it, there she was. Britt began. But Avery wasn't fooled. Behind that bravado was a woman who believed she could take whatever she wanted, who thought that if she pushed hard enough, everyone else would break. First, Avery's mind kept replaying the scene. Brittany's face. The way her fingers had gripped the baby's leg. The venom in her voice. It played on a loop, like a film they couldn't stop watching. But now that the immediate danger had passed, a different feeling settled in, a strange emptiness, the kind that follows intense emotion. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving behind something heavier. Doubt. Did I do the right thing? In the moment, they'd been certain. But now, standing in the quiet, the question lingered. Their fingers gently traced the soft hair of their sleeping child as they stared out the kitchen window, watching the last orange glow of sunset fade into dusk. The calm was almost unsettling, like the quiet before another storm. If I take control now, will I become just like her? The thought echoed. Or am I letting her win by holding back? The old Avery, the judge, would have handled this differently. They would have taken charge instantly, used their presence, their authority, their years of experience managing difficult people. In the courtroom, Avery had been unshakable. Their word was final. Guilty or innocent, lives shifted based on their decisions. They never hesitated. But outside those walls, things were different. They had left that life behind for a reason. They had chosen peace. They had walked away from power because they wanted something else for themselves, for their family. And yet, now, facing Brittany's aggression, that old power had begun to rise again. I could have ended this faster, a voice whispered in their mind. I could have made her see exactly who she was dealing with. The thought was dangerous, tempting. But Avery closed their eyes, breathing deeply, pushing it away. That wasn't who they wanted to be anymore. They didn't want to be the cold, calculating figure who could break someone with a single word. They wanted to protect their daughter, but not by becoming the very thing they despised. And still, Brittany's words echoed. The anger flared. Asterisk, she crossed a line. She hurt my child. That's unforgivable. Asterisk. But then, asterisk was asterisk it? Avery looked down at the baby in their arms. That small, peaceful face was a reminder of why they had left the courtroom in the first place. It wasn't just about physical safety. It was about emotional peace. About not raising a child in a world defined by constant conflict, by the need to dominate, to be right, to control. They had chosen peace. But peace, they were learning, wasn't the absence of battle. It was the choice to fight differently. The fire inside them hadn't disappeared. It was still there, just beneath the surface, rising every time Brittany challenged them. But if they gave in to it, if they wielded that old power without restraint, would they really be any different? No. Avery shook their head, the thought grounding them. Asterisk, I'm not going to become her. I won't let her turn me into someone I'm not. Asterisk. The baby stirred, her tiny hand tugging at Avery's shirt, a small, gentle reminder of what mattered most. Avery's gaze softened. They began to rock her again, the motion slow and soothing, calming them both. You're my reason, they whispered. I'll protect you no matter what. But I won't become like her. I won't let this world turn me into something I'm not. They took another deep breath, releasing the tension in their shoulders. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time in a long while, something deeper than anger stirred inside them, a quiet certainty. Not just in their strength, but in their choice. They were willing to fight. But they wouldn't fight like Brittany. They'd fight for peace. For their family. For the kind of life worth protecting. Avery looked out the window one more time, watching the last streaks of sunlight stretch across the sky, painting it in soft hues of amber and violet. The battle's not over, they thought. Not by a long shot. But I'll face it, whatever comes next, with strength, with clarity, and I won't let it turn me into someone I'm not. They took another deep breath, feeling the calm settle back into their bones. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from silence, but the deeper kind, the kind that follows a storm, when you're still standing and you realize you're stronger than you thought. The quiet that had settled over the house after Brittany's departure felt temporary, fragile, like the stillness before the wind picks up again. Avery's heart was still racing, echoes of the confrontation lingering in their chest. It wasn't just the adrenaline, it was the weight of what had happened and what it meant. Because deep down, Avery knew something. Brittany had left, yes. But she wasn't done. She wasn't the kind of person to walk away quietly, to accept defeat. She would come back. And when she did, it would be fiercer, sharper, more calculated. This wasn't just a clash of wills. It was a line drawn in the sand, and Avery could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. They sat in the living room, their daughter nestled against their chest, small and warm and safe. The weight of their past life, the courtroom, the gavel, the decisions that once shaped lives, pressed against them again, not as a burden, but as a reminder. They had left that world behind, hoping for peace, for simplicity. But life had a way of pulling you back into the fight, especially when the people you love are threatened. And Brittany had made it clear. She wasn't going to let Avery live quietly. Not now. Not ever. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp. Sudden. Cutting through the silence like a blade. Avery froze. Their heart leapt into their throat. Asterisk, it's her. She's back already. Asterisk. They took a slow breath, steadying themselves. This time, they wouldn't react out of anger. This time, they wouldn't let fear take the wheel. They had learned from the past. They had spent years facing down the most difficult people in the most intense rooms, and they knew how to handle someone who thrived on control. A bully. A provocateur. Someone who mistook silence for weakness. With each step toward the door, Avery carried that experience like armor, steady. What do you want? Avery asked. Their voice was steady. Clear. No hesitation. Brittany stepped forward without waiting for an invitation, her eyes flashing with fury. I'm not done with this, Avery. You may think you can control the situation, but you crossed a line. And I don't care who you used to be, you're not going to stop me from doing what I want. Avery didn't flinch. They stood their ground, feeling the weight of their years in the courtroom. The cases, the rulings, the quiet authority that came not from shouting, but from presence. They had held power once. They had been the one to call the shots, to hold people accountable. But this wasn't about the law. Not anymore. This was about something deeper.